We're proud to announce CISO Stories, a new podcast series in partnership with Cybersecurity Collaborative and Cyber Reason. CISO Stories features the candid perspectives and experiences of frontline senior security executives and dives deep into timely security topics. CISO Stories is hosted by Todd Fitzgerald, VP of Cybersecurity Strategy at Cybersecurity Collaborative, and Sam Curry, Chief Product and Security Officer at Cyber Reason. Listen weekly as they speak with extraordinary CISOs by visiting securityweekly.com/CSP. Let's face it, cyber attackers have the advantage. Extra Hop is on a mission to help you take it back. Regain the upper hand with security that can't be undermined, outsmarted, or compromised. When you don't have to choose between protecting your business and moving it forward, that's security uncompromised. See how it works in the full product demo, free online at securityweekly.com/Extra Hop. People require access from anywhere to resources everywhere, but legacy security is ill-equipped for today's hybrid organization. AppGate SDP delivers zero-trust network access for hybrid workforces and workloads, empowering trusted users with secure, frictionless connections to only what they need. Make your attack surface invisible and reduce time to provision by 91% with AppGate SDP, a leader in the 2021 Forrester ZTNA New Wave. Learn more at securityweekly.com/AppGate.
Welcome back to Business Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Jason Albuquerque and Ben Carr. Security Weekly Unlocked will be held in person this December 5th through 7th at the Hilton Lake Buena Vista. We are excited to announce our first round of speakers. Visit securityweekly.com/unlock to register and check out our rockstar lineup. If you've missed any of our previously recorded webcasts or technical trainings, they are available for your viewing pleasure at securityweekly.com/on-demand. All right, gentlemen, it's time for my articles. I actually put 8 articles in here. There's a few of them at the end. They all related to each other, so I just kept them all in here. But this first story, you guys have both been in the CISO role. Jason, you know, CISO and CIO, and to your new role as COO. Ben, you've been in the CISO role. This first article talks about the CISO career path, and is it a dead end? I'd love your take on this article.
I'm living proof it's not. At the end of the day, you know what? My perspective is become a business enabler, learn the business, and I think once you're ingrained, with leaders within your business and you learn the business, sky's the limit, right? I mean, I have colleagues who've gone from CISO to Chief Risk Officer. I've had colleagues who've gone from CISO to CIO. I've done that. I reported up to probably every other role you can think of, from operations officer to CIO to, right directly to the CEO. And don't let a title or an org chart dictate your leadership capabilities. And I think the sky's the limit.
Yeah, I think when Matt, this is an important topic to me and one that I talk a lot about. I don't think it's as much as being a dead end as what you perceive it to be in the legacy and history of the role, right? And CISOs typically came from a technical track and they reported up to the CIO, and it was kind of where do you go from there? But I think now what we're seeing is CISOs elevating out, and, is the CISO role really, is it a CSO? Is it is the information security officer kind of irrelevant? And is it now more of a chief cybersecurity officer or chief security officer, or chief risk officer? It's as much as a dead end role as the chief of legal, chief financial, chief ops. And, I see eventually in some of these companies is, where there's a large cyber risk that they may elevate to the CEO position if they actually focus on business enablement. I think that's the real important thing, is become relevant to the business. Don't focus just on security, but how do you make yourself relevant to the business as a security leader within the organization?
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. If you want the ultimate dead end job, become a CEO. There's really nowhere else to go.
They all dead end somewhere, right?
Right. Exactly right. No, and I agree. But we've talked about these different styles of the CISO and the different tracks. And look, there are some that even into the CTO role, right? Maybe they take on more of a technology role and think about the overall architecture. Chief Risk Officer, obviously, we've talked about many times on this show. And so I think there are lots of different angles. It was just a very interesting way to start this article, but I think they bring up a lot of very good points about learn the business, understand the business. You're going to succeed outside of this role, because if you are a business enabler, doesn't matter which position in the organization, you have a pathway forward.
Yeah, and a lot of the success is just knowing yourself as a leader, right? And exhibiting those
That's exactly what I was going to say. It's knowing what you want to do and what you align to, right? I mean, I've seen these articles where there's, the different types of CISOs, and like ultimately, I think some CISOs and even some companies, it's a wrong match because they're taking a role that they're not suited for, that they don't really want to do because they're looking for the title. I think you really need to dig deeper, figure out what is it ultimately you like about that role or the next role, and how do you achieve success with that, not how do you achieve success with just the title.
Yeah. Talking about risk management, the SEC is serious about cybersecurity. Is your company? I love some of these articles because I think a lot of people, having spent a lot of time on the risk management compliance side of the house in my GRC days, compliance is a driver, but you can't treat it as a checkbox activity. And what I like about this article is it actually talks about the steps you need to go through and like this ongoing focus around cybersecurity. You can't treat these things as these kind of like, I did that, and I'm good. I'm done, because it doesn't work that way from a regulatory standpoint.
Yeah, it's truly been, for a lot of companies, about a compliance check mark, right? It's been that check the box, move on, get it done. And that's been, I think, why there's been a lot of dissatisfaction in the role, and people kind of feel like they're dead-ended, tying into the last article there that you brought up. I think this is again, another wake-up call that it needs to be kind of a center of the line of business, and trying to think about how it's relevant to the business. How do you make yourself relevant? Well, how do you minimize impact and concerns if you're publicly traded with the SEC?
Right. And we've seen some very interesting big fines being levied to some of these organizations. I'm doing a session at the end of the month around privacy and some of the privacy fines that are starting to come out, and the correlations between GDPR and CCPA. In California, just to kind of just give a little foreshadowing, the regulatory body around CCPA is actively out scanning companies' websites, looking for violations, and proactively issuing orders out there. I mean, think about this for a second, right? This is pretty advanced. These people are actively out looking for violations and enforcing 30-day response periods to get back into compliance. This is where the industry is moving. If we treat these things like just a checkbox, you're not going to be prepared for these enforcement actions that are going to come down.
That's right. And,
well, I think
and
this
I
is
think,
Go ahead, Jason.
No, I was just going to say, I think we finally realized that the checkbox mentality hasn't been working, right? And at the end of the day, the only way you're going to get behavior to change is to have some type of, something happen to the organization, whether it's financial or something from a legal perspective. But at the end of the day, if you hit them in the pocket, it's going to entice good behavior, right? And I think that's where we finally gotten to that point where the compliance checkbox mentality was not effective. We've known that for 10 years, but ultimately I think government's catching up.
Yeah. But you know what it did? It drove budgets, right? And these next two articles are around budget, right? It's around how do you get budget for cybersecurity, and then how, not every dollar you spend can be offset as a cost saving somewhere else. I mean, obviously, I think the biggest challenge is getting the right funding to build out these cybersecurity programs. This next article, talks about, walking the board through the challenges at a high level, maybe running them through an exercise like ransomware to educate them, because that's still a big gap here, is making sure the boards understand the risks associated with cybersecurity to actually make the right investments.
Sure. Yeah, the one place that this article missed, and we've talked about this on the show before, one of the main criteria is have a great relationship with your CFO. As a CISO, that's probably one of the strongest relationships you can have. They are so used to presenting to the board on financials. They're so used to what's going to be impactful to that board of directors. And ultimately, having the CFO as an evangelist to your strategy is such a great thing to have in your corner. I think that's step one. Step one is build a wonderful, strong relationship with your chief financial officer.
Yeah, one of the biggest mistakes you can walk into in the role is thinking that you're operating as an island, right, in a silo.
Yes.
And I think you really need to align with your key stakeholders. And you mentioned CFO. I think legal's another one, and I think to some extent HR can be another one, right? I mean, we talked about it in the last it's this segment where we're talking about training and education. I think getting your employees up to speed and how you do effective training that aligns with the mood and feel of the organization is important. But I think the SEC is signaling here that it's something that's got to be taken very seriously. And if you're publicly traded and you're not reporting these risks, it's a big deal. It can have a huge impact on the company. And so, partnering with your CFO and legal to figure out how you're making sure you're addressing those risks and bringing it up to the board and figuring out how to align with the board. I think actually one of the things I'm looking to see in the future is some requirement that from a public board, there needs to be cyber experience on the board, just like they did for CFOs, right? You can't operate on a public board unless you have somebody who has financial experience. And I think far too many boards operate without really any type of cyber oversight where they actually understand the issues that are going on. And I think that training and awareness is a really important piece of the pie too.
Yeah, and understanding the right investments to make and where to make those investments, right?
Yeah.
Jason?
No, I was just going to say I couldn't agree more. Ben, you're absolutely correct that we need some level of cybersecurity expertise on those board of directors to be able to be that subject matter expert in the room, supporting a CISO when they're having that conversation, right? Because at the end of the day,
and to tie back to the dead end conversation, if you don't want a dead end, I mean that's the next step, right? Is board membership. And so I think there's a really successful career arc for people who want to actually participate and contribute. And it gets back to I think what you brought up, make yourself relevant, right, Jason? It's how do you make yourself relevant to the business to be seen as a full participant in the discussion?
Right. That's right.
Do tech investments really yield cost savings? Not necessarily, because they could help you reduce risk, right? One of the big areas that was identified in some of the research earlier this year around RSA that Cisco did with Wendy Nather was, legacy systems and the potential risk around these systems. Sometimes you have to make investments, not because they yield cost savings. They could, but they could also improve your overall risk profile. So I thought, they focused this article more on the cost savings front of it, but
potential cost avoidance.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's really what I think and that's been the hard thing in justifying the budgets, right? How do you justify against the potential, right? Where, your other areas of the business, sales and marketing, they're trying to justify against, what potential income. We're usually trying to justify against how we're avoiding the potential cost of, a public breach or incident or, a payout or some type of legal issue. So that's been a big challenge. How do you justify that budget against a maybe?
It's funny because we talked about it earlier, having the relationship with all of the other C-level stakeholders in the organization.
Yeah.
And I've found that getting investment, that's a partnership as well, right? So if you're looking down, let's say a 2022 budget and a brand new ERP system is in flight, you're looking to get rid of some technical debt because you have a legacy ERP system that is unsupported, and you go at it with the CFO, right? Same thing with an HR. Now, the HR folks can talk about streamlining process, efficiencies added in, being able to focus on growth and transformation because of the updated technology. And you know where the CISO comes in? Well, here at the same time, here's how we're going to mitigate risk. Here's how we're going to, minimize the threat vectors that exist today. Here's how we're going to get rid of the technical debt. It's a combo platter, right? I mean, you have to be going into this with the stakeholders in the line of business and building that momentum, building those evangelists, because you're killing multiple birds with one stone.
Well, I can't remember if it was in this article or another article that I read recently that they brought up a very interesting point of, and I've actually found this to be beneficial, is when you're going into those budgeting cycles at the end of the year, there's always this inherent desire to say, if I don't spend the budget, I'm going to lose it, right? Where I think it actually is beneficial sometimes to go back to the line of business. Again, if you want to be perceived as actually truly being part of the discussion, go back and say, hey, I've got some excess budget in here. I know you're struggling, chief legal, chief human resources. I know you're struggling and I see that you're working on this project. can I help you fund some of that, right? And
100%.
truly working on that partnership, God, that pays off so many dividends in the long run when now you've got a champion when you try to go for something that you really need to get done.
That's it. And you're achieving multiple goals, one for your organization and one for the stakeholder that's sitting alongside of you, right? Because you're helping them adopt new technology, right? And I say adopt, right? Because we talk about, do tech investments really yield cost savings? Here's some of the biggest, sitting in a CIO seat, here's some of the biggest problems that I've realized with tech investments. We're not adopting the technology. We buy the blinky light, we buy the new shiny tool, but adoption.
Yeah.
We have to be taking advantage of the technology.
We used to call it shelfware, right? Back in legacy IT. And that's the same thing. I mean, you're 100% right there. If you don't adopt and actually get it to be accepted by the business, then you're wasting the money.
That's it. So our job as CISOs isn't only to get that investment and get that project, is to ensure the organization's adopting the technology to its full extent.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you need a list of what you should be focused on, CISA publishes their top bad security practices. And it boils down to two things. One, outdated software, and identity and access. That's it. That's it in a summary.
Yeah, this article number 5 was duh. We talk about this all the time.
Let me tell you what you already know.
Yeah.
Right. So yes, I need to update my systems, get rid of my legacy stuff, because all these unsupported systems are creating extreme risks. And oh, by the way, get rid of default passwords and enable multi-factor authentication.
Hey.
That's it.
Next.
It's just a low-hanging fruit, Matt. Why do that?
Right, because it's not cool, right? It's not building an advanced SOC with SIM and SOAR and XDR technologies, right? Because that's really fun stuff to do.
Well, the marketing people can't make money. Can't make money off of that.
Right? How long have we been saying to patch your vulnerability, fix your old software, and implement good control systems, right? And so it's the shiny ball. Like we are cats, and it's catnip, and we chase the sexy security stuff. And we just forgo all this stuff that we could make a big impact with little risk and actually sometimes very low cost.
Yeah. No, I know. It just befuddles me every day. We talk about these same things, but yet here we are. The top 3, same things we've been talking about. These last 3 articles are talking about the remote workforce. And what I think is interesting here is we're kind of falling backwards a little bit when you look at our skill gap creation here in the remote workforce. We're losing good talent in this remote world because of expectations. But more importantly, the middle article of this 3-part series is people are just literally bypassing cybersecurity controls in a remote work environment. And this is where things get a little scary is, what kind of risks are we creating in this remote workforce under some of these pressures?
Yeah, there's so much to unpack in all 3 of these. I mean, Matt, there's reports after studies coming out. I think Microsoft just launched a new study on this too, right? About how they're finding productivity and collaboration and innovation. That gap is widening now that we're in a remote workforce. And the question is why? Well, what I'm starting to see now, and we as an organization are trying to flip this a little bit. We're so packed with Zoom meetings and Teams meetings, and we're packing our days full of just meet, video call, that we can't sit back and lock in and preserve the time that we would normally use for innovation and growing the business and transforming the business, training our folks. We're literally running 1,000 miles an hour, not like we weren't before, right? Before the pandemic. Now it's just worse. And at the end of the day, our employees are feeling bad because they're home and now they're working 16-hour days on top of it, right? Trying to make up for that. So, there's just crazy trends happening right now where we as leaders within an organization, I'm telling my staff, preserve the time, lock it in, guard it. Don't let anybody take it away. I don't care if it's the CEO. Reschedule it. Get it in another time.
Yeah, there's ironies in this, right? And I think one of the biggest ones is that, you see a lot of companies that going into, pre-pandemic really said, hey, we don't think we can do remote work. It's ineffective. People aren't going to be doing as much as we want them to do. And, you get into the pandemic and you go to fully remote work and you realize, hey, my staff is actually more productive. They're doing more stuff, right? There's greater efficiency. I'm getting more stuff done. Yet at the same time, now they're saying some companies are wanting to get people back in the office and not realizing, there was a recent article out where Amazon is actually saying they're going to pay people less. I think it was Amazon, right? If you're fully remote. And it's like, are you doing less work? Like what I found moving in the pandemic was people were working more. Like you said, Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting, no time off in between. When you're in the office, you took 15 minutes and you talked to somebody. So at least you felt like you were getting a gap and there was a social aspect to it. And I think what this all boils down to is we're losing a little bit of the human element. And when I had my staff at the beginning of the pandemic, what I told them was, you have to focus on, some on your personal time. You can't work 14 hours a day. Just because somebody can schedule a Zoom meeting doesn't mean you should take it. I think Microsoft is just introducing into Teams a feature where it's giving some buffer time in between meetings automatically. So I think we need to focus back on, as managers, as executives, how do we keep the human in the equation? How do we have that conversation with our employees, telling them they have to be sensitive to that? How do we lead by example, also doing that, right? How do we take a vacation and actually go on vacation? How do we tell people, hey, I'm not going to do a back-to-back meeting. I need 15 minutes in between. It's that human element that I think is missing, and that's why when you don't take that into account when you're designing software and application or security control, people are going to take the easy way around if you're making the user experience really horrible. And in security, for a long time, we did that. I mean, I don't know. Jason, I mean, you agree with that, Matt?
Oh, I 100% agree with that. I really do. And we have to try to figure out how to replicate, and we, us old people call it the water cooler conversation. How do we replicate that? Because so much innovation came out of that water cooler conversation, or just, taking a trip to take a bio break and you see somebody in the hallway. So much innovation and so much good conversation and strategy came out of that. How do we replicate that? How do we create that unscheduled innovation time that you can just sit around and kind of throw spaghetti at the wall? So much good came out of that. We got to fix that, right? And that's the human element. That makes people so engaged and so stimulated to be able to have those off the cuff, innovation conversations. We got to get back to that. That's where we're losing it. Everything is structured and scheduled in meetings. Go.
I think is in this industry, in the security industry, that's like one thing we're bad at because we're really technical, right? But like if you want to be really successful, focus on the human element, and that will reap serious dividends. I mean, just across the board, relationships with other stakeholders, how you engage with the board, how you engage with your team, like figure out how to do the human element really well.
Yeah. And that, Ben, that's both sides of the aisle, right? That's for yourself as a team, and then for the end users, right? Because my mind, when we started talking about folks circumventing security controls because there's too much friction, in my head, I went right to SDLC process. How do you create a dev test environment where you can do UAT and test the user experience with a subset of users to know it's a good experience before you roll it out?
Yeah, and you mentioned, you went to the end user experience, which is really important, right? But there's that middle ground where I think a lot of people are struggling right now in the transformation to cloud and dealing with DevOps. And when we try to implement security on it, we're trying to do a legacy method and implement it on. We're making it really restrictive, a bounded box. And the guys in, DevOps are saying, you're not understanding how we do development. And so I think understanding what the user experience is throughout the chain, all the way to the customer, is super important. Like we're missing that sometimes. I think that's what's causing, you brought it up, friction, right? Friction's a great word. We have a lot of friction and we need to figure out how to reduce that.
Yep. Agreed, 100%.
I mean, I miss my whiteboarding sessions where I could just be in a meeting and draw on the whiteboard, right? I mean, that's what we did. Like, that's how we worked. That's how we innovated. Sitting literally, I had 15 meetings on Thursday last week. 15 meetings back to back to back. I think I had 2 half-hour breaks the entire day. How am I going to get anything else done outside of those meetings, right? And then the last article, just to kind of close this loop, tech workers want higher pay and flexibility, right? And yet, I think it was Google wants to. I think it was Google, not Amazon.
It was Google.
Ben.
It was Google, not Amazon. You're right.
Right.
Yeah.
They want to reduce your salary if you're a remote worker. Well, guess what you're going to lose? You're going to lose the technology workers because that's not what they're looking for.
Well, and it's funny because the companies are reaping the cost benefits, right? Like of having reduced office space, less energy costs, right? They're getting more productive workforce because they're not traveling in. People are happier, like all the benefits, but they also now want to pay less. I didn't understand that at all. Like that boggles my mind that anybody would think that they wouldn't lose talent over that.
Yeah, I agree with you. Ben, thank you so much for being my new co-host. Guys, this was a great discussion. I can't wait until we do more of these. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. We'll see you next week on Business Security Weekly.